The golden cage. She had opened a silver box in the attic and found adoption papers with her father's signature. By sunset, a man with a crowbar would smash her car window. By midnight, she'd be upside down in a police cruiser, blood mixing with rain on her face. But the real truth, the one that would burn the cottage to ash in her mind, was waiting in a cemetery at sunrise, 13 hours earlier. The champagne flute felt heavy in Elena's hand. Her thumb traced the rim in circles, following the texture of the crystal, while the silverware clinked against china beneath the voices. She sat at the long mahogany table with its white lace cloth, the one that had been arranged exactly this way for 30 years, maybe more. Golden light poured through the windows, dust motes dancing through the beams like they were performing. Outside, the summer heat pressed against the glass. Martha rose from her seat, and the table quieted. The birthday sash across her mother's body read 60 and fabulous in glittering letters, though it had slipped sideways just slightly off-center. Martha's pearls, a double strand of cream, yellowed with age, caught the light as she lifted her glass. Her smile was tight, rehearsed, the kind of smile Elena had seen 1,000 times before. Perfect, empty, with teeth showing but eyes remaining somewhere distant. "To 30 years in this house," Martha said, her voice honeyed and measured like a speech she'd practiced in the mirror, "where every memory is exactly as it should be." The sound of glasses clinking filled the room. Everyone drank. Elena watched her father, Arthur, sitting at the opposite end of the table. He wasn't smiling. His eyes were fixed on her with a cold, measuring stare. The same look he gave to people in business meetings, the look that calculated value and flaw simultaneously. A spreadsheet in human form. Elena's hand trembled. A single drop of champagne fell from her flute onto the lace, a small dark stain blooming outward across the white fabric like spilled ink. The room seemed to pause. She pushed her chair back. The wood shrieked against the floor, a sound that made 3 people flinch. Elena stood, her floral silk dress swirling around her knees, the flowers on the fabric suddenly looking like they were wilting. "I forgot the extra candles," she said, her voice coming out breathless and wrong. In the attic. No one stopped her. She turned and moved toward the hallway, feeling their eyes on her back even after she'd crossed the threshold. The attic was dim, lit only by the last rays of evening that sliced through the small circular window near the peak. Elena climbed the wooden stairs quickly, her dress catching on a loose nail. She freed it and kept going. Trunks lined the walls. These were old, covered in dust and the accumulated debris of a life that someone had decided to store and forget. Elena found what she was looking for. A stack of them, piled haphazardly. She pulled a moth-eaten wool blanket off the top, the fibers breaking apart in her hands. Beneath it sat a silver jewelry box with a heavy, rusted padlock. The padlock was engraved with initials, M.R. Her fingers reached for it. The metal was cold, and she was trying to understand what the initials meant when a sound stopped her. A floorboard creaking behind her, slow and deliberate. A shadow loomed over the attic entrance. It was tall, filling the space completely, and the figure wore a heavy trench coat despite the heat outside. In one hand was a brass candlestick, held like a weapon with the casual certainty of someone who knew how to use it. Elena froze. Her fingers remained on the lock. The figure lunged forward with a speed that didn't match the body's bulk. Elena rolled to the left as the brass candlestick came down hard on the silver box, hitting it with a metallic clang that seemed to tear through the air itself. Wood splinters exploded from the trunk, scattering across the floor like shrapnel. Elena kicked upward with both feet, her shoe connecting with a stack of old magazines. National Geographic issues from 1994. their yellow borders bright even in the dim light. The stack tumbled toward the intruder's shins, and he stumbled backward, just enough. She grabbed the silver box and dived through the narrow attic door. Her body hit each wooden stair as she slid down, the wood rough against her dress. And then she was in the hallway, slamming her bedroom door shut behind her. The lock. She turned it, her hands shaking so badly she almost couldn't manage it. Elena leaned against the wood, gasping. Her chest heaved. Above her, she could hear footsteps. The intruder was moving through the attic, searching, but more slowly now, more carefully, as if checking what had been damaged. She looked at the silver box in her hands. The lock hadn't broken, but the impact had bent the lid just enough. There was a gap now, and through it, she could see yellowed paper inside. Her fingers reached into the gap and pulled out a single sheet. On the outside of the box, in handwriting she recognized as her father's, was a signature and a date. Arthur Vance, July 1994. That was before she was born. That was impossible. It was late when she opened the box completely. She used a steel nail file, working the bent lid carefully until the metal groaned and gave way. The lid came up, and a thick stack of documents tied with a rotting black ribbon fell onto her duvet. Elena's hands were steady now, but her breathing wasn't. She pulled away the ribbon. It crumbled as she touched it, and picked up the top sheet. The words hit her like physical impact. St. Jude's Orphanage, voluntary surrender. Beneath that, a section labeled biological parent. The name there had been scratched out, not crossed out with a single line, scratched, violently, repeatedly. The pen had torn through the paper, and what remained was a series of black slashes that concealed whatever name had been written there. Elena whispered something. It didn't sound like her own voice. They didn't just keep it a secret. They killed the person I was. The rain started then, hitting the window with a sudden intensity. Each drop sounded like a small accusation. She found a bundle of letters tied together with string. The handwriting on them was frantic, slanted, the writing of someone in distress. Elena unfolded the first one. The postmark was dated 1993. The words swam in front of her eyes. Arthur, I know where you took her. You can't erase a bloodline. You can't keep her from what she is. It was signed with a name, S. Rossi. The letters were all the same theme, repeated over years. Growing more desperate, growing angrier. Each one asking the same questions, making the same accusations, until the final one, dated 1994, simply said, I'm coming back for her. Elena held the letters in her lap and waited for morning. She walked into the kitchen at 8 a.m. Her parents were already seated. Arthur sat with the newspaper open in front of him, the pages crisp and new. Martha was stirring a cup of tea, the spoon moving in slow, deliberate circles. They both looked up as Elena entered, and their faces registered her presence the way a security camera registers motion. Noticed, cataloged, filed away. Elena approached the table. She dropped the adoption papers directly onto the surface, letting them fall on top of the jam jar. They scattered slightly, some sliding into the butter dish. Who is S. Rossi? Elena said. The words came out cold and loud. And why did you buy me? Arthur folded his newspaper with a precision that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. He folded it again, creating sharp creases, though he didn't look at the papers she'd placed on the table. His eyes moved to Martha. Martha slowly removed the spoon from her tea. She wiped it carefully on a white linen napkin, taking her time, the gesture deliberate and orchestrated, like a scene in a play. She placed the spoon down on the table with a surgical click. You were a gift we gave ourselves, Arthur said. His voice was dead, monotone, the kind of voice that suggested no emotion was hiding beneath the surface, because there had never been any emotion there at all. Gifts do not ask questions. Martha stood. She walked to the sink and began to pour the tea down the drain. The sound of the liquid hitting the stainless steel was deafening in the silence that had filled the room. The tea swirled, amber and fragrant, before disappearing into nothing. Elena's hands were clenched. She watched the tea go down, then looked at her parents. Both of them seemed smaller now, collapsed somehow, or perhaps she had finally seen them properly, and they had always been this small, and she'd simply been too young to notice. She left the kitchen. No one tried to stop her. Her blue sedan hit the main road with tires that spit gravel. Elena checked the rearview mirror and felt her stomach contract. A black SUV with tinted windows was already there, inches from her bumper, the engine roaring like something alive and hungry. Her hands gripped the steering wheel. The road twisted ahead, lined with trees on both sides, the kind of road where you could disappear and no one would hear you scream. Behind her, the SUV stayed close, not falling back, not trying to pass. Just holding position, steady and patient. The SUV hit her from behind. Elena's head snapped backward against the headrest. Her chest slammed into the steering wheel, driving the air from her lungs. The blue sedan swerved toward the shoulder, toward a ditch lined with trees. Her side mirror shattered against a branch, the glass exploding in a shower of crystalline fragments. Her car stabilized. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the wheel. She pressed down on the accelerator. The engine roared, and the sedan jumped forward, but the SUV was faster. It was built for this. Everything about it screamed that it had been made for exactly this purpose. The SUV pulled alongside her. The driver's window was down, and for a moment Elena thought she might see who was inside, might finally understand what was happening. But the tint was too dark, the angle wrong. Then the SUV veered hard left, and she had to jerk the wheel to avoid a head-on collision with nothing. The sedan went into the ditch. The driver's door swung open before Elena could move. The man from the attic, she recognized him instantly, stepped out with a crowbar in his hand. He looked both ways down the road with the careful attention of someone checking for traffic before crossing the street. No cars came. The road was empty. He approached the driver's side window. Elena had maybe 2 seconds to move. She didn't think about it. She didn't have time. She just kicked with both feet, driving the heel of her shoe into the window as hard as she could. The glass didn't break. It just cracked, a spider web of fractures spreading outward from the point of impact. The man raised the crowbar and smashed the window. The glass exploded inward, raining down onto Elena's lap like terrible confetti. She was already moving. She threw herself across to the passenger side, kicked that door open, and scrambled out onto the shoulder. Her dress was shredded, the fabric catching on pieces of metal and glass. Elena didn't stop to free it. She ran into the woods. Behind her, she heard the man curse. She heard him running, his footsteps heavy on the underbrush. But she was already deeper in, already lost in the thickness of trees and thorns, and the absolute certainty that if he caught her, she would not leave these woods alive. The cabin appeared after what might have been minutes or hours. Time had stopped meaning anything. Elena pushed through thorny bushes, her floral dress now hanging off her in tatters, her skin scratched and bleeding in dozens of places. The cabin was small and rotting, the wood gray with age and moisture. The door hung by a single hinge, moving slightly in the wind, like it was trying to leave. She didn't hear anyone behind her anymore. She didn't trust that. She crept inside. The interior was darker than it should have been, the windows boarded up with planks of wood that had themselves begun to rot. Elena's eyes adjusted slowly. When they did, her breath stopped. The wall in front of her was covered in photographs. Dozens of them. Polaroids mostly, the kind that faded with age. They were pictures of children. Different children. Different ages. Different everything except for one common element. Each one had a thick red X drawn across their face in marker. Elena approached the wall slowly. The photographs were positioned carefully, pinned or taped in neat rows. A catalog. An inventory. Her eyes moved across them, and somewhere in her chest, something began to collapse. And then she saw herself. A photograph of Elena at 5 years old, standing in front of this cottage wearing a blue dress. There was no X on her photograph. The face was clear, unmarred, preserved in the fading colors of the Polaroid film. The cabin seemed to tilt. Elena put her hand out to steady herself and found the wall was damp, the plaster peeling away in sheets. She was breathing, but couldn't feel the breath. She was standing, but couldn't feel her legs. She took the photograph from the wall. Her younger self stared back at her, unaware of what that cottages meant, unaware that dozens of other children had been marked with red X's, unaware that something in this family's history was not just cruel, but architecturally evil, built into the foundation like asbestos in old walls. Elena held the photograph and walked back out into the trees. The sun was setting, turning everything the color of blood. The cottage gates were where she knew they would be. Elena stood before them as the light faded, and the gates seemed to transform into something monstrous. Wrought iron twisted into shapes that looked like reaching hands. 2 police cruisers were parked on the driveway beyond the gates, their blue and red lights pulsing against the dark trees. The light came and went, painting everything in alternating colors like the world was having a seizure. Arthur stood talking to a sergeant. His hand rested on the man's shoulder in a gesture that suggested friendship. A relationship built over time, a shared understanding. Elena watched them. She knew that gesture. She'd seen it before in 1,000 different contexts. It was her father's gesture of control, the one he used when he wanted someone to know that he owned them, that he could move them like pieces on a board. The sergeant turned and saw her. For a moment, just a moment, his face cleared of the professional blandness, and Elena saw the truth. It was the man from the attic. It was the man from the road. It was the same man who had smashed her window and hunted her into the woods. He was wearing a police uniform. He pulled handcuffs from his belt and began walking toward the gate. Behind him, Arthur was already turning away, his expression satisfied, the expression of a man whose instructions had been understood and were about to be executed. "Officer," Arthur said, not even bothering to look at his daughter. "My daughter is having a psychotic break. Take her to the private facility." Elena's hands clenched. She looked at the gates, then at the man approaching them, then at the darkness beyond. She turned and ran. The back seat of the police cruiser was separated from the front by a steel cage that looked like it belonged in an animal transport. Elena sat on the bench seat with her hands cuffed behind her back, the metal digging into her wrists. She could see through the cage into the front of the vehicle. The dashboard lights cast everything in shades of blue and green. The man, who wasn't really a police officer, was driving. She could see the back of his neck, the line of his jaw, the hands gripping the steering wheel. He seemed calm. That terrified her more than if he'd seemed angry. Elena leaned forward. The cuffs cut into her skin. She put everything she had into the movement, all the panic, all the rage, all the absolute knowledge that she was going to die tonight. And she drove her forehead directly into the back of his head. The impact made a sound like something cracking. The cruiser swerved violently, the tires losing grip on the asphalt for a moment. The steering wheel jerked to the right. Elena was thrown against the cage divider. The driver reached back with a baton, an expandable one, all black metal and terrible potential. He swung it blindly through the cage, not looking, just swinging with the fury of someone who'd been hit and wanted nothing more than to hit back harder. Elena pulled her legs up. She was small enough to bring them between her body and the cage, and when the baton came through, she kicked at it with everything she had. Her heel connected with his arm. The baton fell from his grip and clattered to the floor of the front seat, then rolled under the dashboard. He cursed. He was trying to reach down for it when he didn't see the curve in the road. The cruiser hit a ditch at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. The world inverted. Elena was upside down, then right side up. Then the car was rolling and everything was motion and chaos, and the sound of metal screaming as it bent in ways metal should never bend. The windows shattered. Glass filled the air like diamonds falling from the sky. Elena's body tumbled like laundry in a dryer, and then suddenly there was stillness. The cruiser came to rest upside down. The engine hissed. Something was dripping, water or fuel or blood. Elena couldn't tell which. She was hanging from her cuffs, her wrists bearing her weight, her shoulders screaming. Her vision was blurred with blood. She pulled herself up with her abdominal muscles, burning, and managed to get her feet against the ceiling of the upturned car. She pushed, using her legs to create slack in her arms. The cuffs came loose just enough. She twisted her wrist, pain like lightning, and one hand came free. The other followed. Elena kicked at the shattered window. The frame was damaged, and the glass crumbled outward. She pulled herself through, inch by inch, her body scraping against the broken edges, adding new wounds to the ones she already had. The night air hit her face. It was raining. Cool, clean rain. She pushed herself up on her hands and knees in the mud. Rain poured down, washing blood from her face, mixing it with the dirt. She could taste metal and earth. Across the road, standing under a black umbrella in the rain, was Martha. Her mother didn't move. She just stood there, watching. The umbrella held perfectly centered above her head, her posture impeccable even as the world around her seemed to be burning. Martha's face was blank, expressionless, the face of someone watching a television show with the sound turned off. Elena looked at her mother. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run across the road and hurt her in ways that would be impossible to explain to a court. She wanted Martha to look away, to acknowledge something, shame, guilt, regret, anything that suggested there was a human being inside that body instead of a sophisticated automaton. Martha didn't move. The sirens grew louder. The real sirens, the ones coming from the county, not from her father's private security dressed in stolen uniforms. Red and blue lights appeared on the horizon, growing closer. Elena crawled away from the overturned cruiser, into the woods, into the darkness. She didn't look back at Martha. The cottage was silent when Elena returned. It was pre-dawn, that gray time when the world hadn't decided if it was night or day. She moved through the house like a ghost, her movements precise and silent. She knew where everything was. She'd lived here her entire life. Arthur's office was on the second floor, east wing, overlooking the gardens. The door was locked, but Elena had watched her father use his keycard 1,000 times. She found the spare in Martha's drawer. Her mother kept it taped to the back of a mirror and used it to open the door. The office was exactly as she remembered. Mahogany desk, leather chair, walls lined with books that had never been read. On the desk sat a heavy brass key. Beside it was a ledger marked Acquisitions in gold leaf on the spine. Elena's muddy hand reached for the key first. Her fingers closed around it. The metal was cold. She opened the ledger. The pages were filled with entries. Names and dates and amounts of money. Lots of money. Millions of dollars. Descriptions written in a meticulous hand. Michael, age 7, excellent health, paid $180,000. Jessica, age 11, specific requests, paid $275,000. Alexander, age 5, expedited timeline, paid $220,000. Page after page, child after child, each one marked with a price. At the bottom of the most recent page, there was one more entry. Elena, age 0 months, paid in full, July 1994. Dawn came with police cruisers and officers who weren't wearing masks. The real officers. Elena heard them downstairs, heard Arthur being read his rights, heard Martha crying for the first time in her life. A sound that was more disturbing than silence. Elena stood in the grand hallway of the cottage. The portraits of the family lined the walls, formal oils painted by some expensive artist, images of Arthur and Martha looking perfect and timeless and evil. Above them, the hallway stretched upward to the high ceiling. She held a match. It was still burning, the small flame consuming the wooden stick inch by inch, moving toward her fingers. Arthur appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Martha was behind him, her face disintegrating. When he saw the match, when he saw the ledger in Elena's other hand, his expression changed. "Every lie you ever told," Elena said, her voice steady and cold, "is in this book, and I've already sent the photos to the real police." Arthur lunged forward, but he only made it 2 steps before the officers grabbed him from both sides. He sank to his knees, aged 10 years in a single moment, transformed from a powerful man into something small and collapsing. The sirens outside were getting closer. More units. Backup. The entire mechanism of real authority, not the purchased kind, was arriving. Elena watched the match burn down. She watched Arthur's face as he understood that there was nothing left to control. No one left to buy. No mechanism that would save him. She watched Martha, who had been standing motionless, suddenly move toward her daughter with what might have been an apology or might have been a final act of cruelty. Elena would never know because the officers caught Martha before she could reach the stairs. Elena put the match back in the box. She didn't need it. The evidence was enough. The cemetery was quiet at sunrise. Elena drove past the police tape at the cottage entrance and followed the road north toward the town, then east toward the oldest part of the county where the graves stretched back to the 1800s. She found the headstone easily. It had been burned into her mind the moment she saw S. Rossi's name on those frantic letters. The stone read, Sylvia Rossi, 1970-1994. Beside it was a smaller, newer stone, placed recently, perhaps within the last few hours, by someone who'd known what would happen and had prepared for the truth. The new stone had no name on it, just a date, Elena's birth date. Elena kneeled in front of the grave. The grass was wet with dew. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a locket that had been in the silver box, buried beneath the adoption papers. It was gold, old, the kind of jewelry that had been made to last through centuries. She opened it. Inside was a photograph, small and faded by time. It showed a woman holding a baby. The woman had dark hair and Elena's eyes, the same sharp, intelligent eyes that had looked back at her from mirrors her entire life. The baby was wrapped in a white blanket. Behind them, barely visible but unmistakable, was the cottage. The family cottage. But it wasn't a cottage in this photograph. It was something else. Something that belonged to the woman with the dark hair. Something that meant something. The photograph was dated on the back, July 1st, 94. The same month as Elena's purchase date. Sylvia hadn't been some orphan mother desperate to give up her child. She had owned the cottage, She had had a daughter. And somewhere in the years between 1994 and now, Arthur and Martha Vance hired staff. Elena understood now. The kind of people who managed wealthy households had taken everything. They had taken Sylvia's child. They had taken Sylvia's life. They had taken Sylvia's cottage and turned it into a place where children were bought and sold like property, where names were erased and identities were replaced with numbers in a ledger. Elena closed the locket and held it in her hand. The sun was rising over the cemetery, turning the sky orange and gold. The headstones cast long shadows. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear birds singing, the simple, ordinary sound of the world continuing on. She looked at the grave that had no name and understood everything. She was the owner of that cottage. She was Sylvia's daughter. She was the person that Arthur and Martha had tried to erase, and they had failed. Elena placed the locket on Sylvia's headstone and walked back to her car.